It's been nearly 60 years since President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Despite only serving in office for 3 years, JFK is one of the most popular presidents in American history. The young, stylish icon had a natural knack for politics, leadership, and represented a sense of country and idealism that inspired millions. But these traits alone weren't what propelled JFK into the public sphere. The Kennedy name was a big driving force in the 20th century. To be a Kennedy meant you were destined for big things. The prominent East Coast family was known across the nation for their dominance in business, public service, and politics. Many in the clan have held top titles in politics, ranging from ambassador to U.S. senator to attorney general.
They were raised with this sensibility that they are here to serve, to give back. I mean, they were all born wealthy. Joe was born wealthy. His kids were born extremely wealthy. So they didn't necessarily need to work, at least not a regular job. So I think their sense of what they could and should do with their lives was to give back in different ways, whether politically or otherwise.
That's Neil Thompson, a journalist and the author of The First Kennedys, The Humble Roots of an American Dynasty. Thompson says that much has been said in the media about the Kennedy name over the years. It's no secret that the family has dealt with their fair share of past controversies and tragedies.
There are a lot of things you can criticize. There are a lot of flaws. Many of them exhibited their flaws very publicly across time. But the one thing they did do is give back and serve, and in particular with a focus on those in need. I do think the Kennedys did have a sense of helping those who needed help.
While public service is a key trait of their legacy, another aspect is the classic image of this elite family. Many portraits display large get-togethers where everyone is dressed to the nines, enjoying parties or summer getaways along the picturesque beaches of the East Coast. This was especially true in the 20th century, when the family commanded immense recognition, power, and privilege. However, it wasn't always this way. So much has been covered about the Kennedys at their peak, but how did they get there? Who started it all? It's rarely mentioned that the Kennedy name, just a few generations before JFK, meant nothing. The first descendants, Bridget Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, were simply poor Irish immigrants seeking a better life. Thompson says the couple both grew up in rural southeastern Ireland and had spent much of their lives working in agriculture. But when the potato famine hit Ireland in 1845 and continued to worsen, life became very hard.
For Bridget Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, they were slightly better off than some of the other farm families across the island, especially in the West, which got hit harder by the potato famine. But still, it upended their lives completely, for sure. They did sort of live under the threat of eviction. I found evidence that their landlord was a little bit more gracious than some others and didn't threaten to kick them out when they were a little bit late on the rent, which happened often. But it did trigger early on, and increasingly over the late 1840s, this mass escape from Ireland. And Bridget and Patrick were part of that escape.
While the U.S. was a symbol of hope and great opportunity, many fleeing refugees faced a different reality upon arrival. In the mid-19th century, there was a lot of anti-Irish sentiment as hundreds of thousands of Irish immigrants flooded into America. Bridget and Patrick were just one of many who chose to settle down in Boston. Bridget began working as a maid, while Patrick became a barrel maker. But it wasn't a comfortable life by any means. Poverty and disease ran rampant.
So Bridget and Patrick lived in East Boston, married in 1849, started raising a family, had 2 daughters, but then lost their first son, John F. Kennedy, the first John F. Kennedy, who died at 20 months because many of the neighborhoods where these Irish immigrants lived were unhygienic and full of disease, and people died in very large numbers, children and adults. In fact, the life expectancy for first generation child of an Irish immigrant was 5 years. And in Bridget's case, she raised 3 daughters, lost her first son at 20 months, but managed to have another son, PJ, and kept all 4 of those children alive beyond that 5-year terrible life expectancy.
Bridget's other children survived these conditions, but her husband Patrick died in 1858 from tuberculosis at the age of 35. Now a widow and single mother of 4, she worked hard to provide for her family. Over the next 10 years, she climbed the ladder at different jobs, learning several new skills along the way.
In time, decided to go into business for herself, and she opened her own grocery store sometime around the end of the Civil War in East Boston, which was truly a remarkable feat because there weren't many female business owners at that time, and even fewer were female Irish immigrant widows. So for her to open her own business and have that business succeed, a business that she owned for the rest of her life, caps off this remarkable ascent for this woman who came poor with nothing, faced hardship after hardship with the loss of her son and then her husband, but shows this ambition and grit and tenacity and savvy and becomes kind of a community fixture. In time, she was able to buy the building where her grocery store was occupied and then bought the building next to that and became, remarkably to me, a landlord, leasing out the apartments above to incoming Irish immigrants. 2 of those immigrants became her sons-in-law. So she became a very well-known and trusted and respectable neighborhood business leader.
From nothing, Bridget was able to carve out a name in America for her children and future generations. One of her sons, P.J. Kennedy, would go on to be a successful businessman and prominent Massachusetts politician, beginning the Kennedys' long reign in politics.
His success really does set the family up for what is about to come in the 20th century. Other histories of the Kennedys focus on Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, RFK's father, and the successes that he had in business. But it really all started with PJ. Not just his political success, but his business success, and not just in the saloon and liquor business, but he went into banking, he got involved in real estate, he was part owner of a coal company. He was just wildly successful at anything he got involved in, gave those skills to his son, Joe, who chose not to get involved in politics, but was a huge success in business, and then in turn pushed his own children to get involved in politics or public service.
One of those children he pushed was John F. Kennedy, who would become a U.S. Senator and then President in 1961. While the Kennedy men had many triumphs, it's important to remember that without the perseverance of Bridget Murphy Kennedy, there likely would be no legacy today. Looking ahead, as the Kennedy name wanes in current politics, we had to ask Thompson, what does the family's future hold? Is there still a place for this old-school name in politics?
When we think of the Kennedys, we still, and I even use it as my own shorthand, we think of JFK and we think of RFK. We think of the Kennedys of the past and the roles that they played and the tragedies that they've faced. And there are many members of that family who have served well, Teddy Kennedy for many years in Congress and other members in Congress. But right now, 2022, it's the first time in decades that we haven't had a Kennedy in Congress. So I don't know what's going to happen next. Right now, I still think we hold them up as this ideal, iconic royal family, America's royal family and that kind of thing. But I think we're in a transition where either they will fade away and be just a sort of distant historical memory, or maybe there's some new younger Kennedy members in the wings waiting to have their own impact on America in a new and different way, which would be a great thing to see.
To find out more about this topic and our guest, Neil Thompson, visit viewpointsradio.org. Also, check out his book, The First Kennedys, The Humble Roots of an American Dynasty, available online and in bookstores now. For more behind the scenes, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
The families that I spoke to, every single one of them, their main priority was first the safety of their children, getting them to a safe space.
The refugee crisis in and around Ukraine, as well as across the globe. Then,
they're not designed to last. They're designed to realize a profit very quickly.
Understanding the declining quality of the clothes we buy. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
That's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.